Picture a world where vast caravans of camels, laden with treasures beyond imagination, vanished into the dust of time. For centuries, the Silk Road wasn't just a single path. It was a sprawling web of trade routes, each one a lifeline connecting empires, cultures, and continents. But what if I told you that some of these routes, once bustling with merchants and adventurers, have been erased from history, lost to war, climate, or simply the passage of time? Today, we're setting out to uncover 25 of these forgotten pathways, roads that carried silk, spices, and secrets across deserts and mountains, only to disappear without a trace. Think about the last time you held a piece of silk or sprinkled cinnamon into your tea. Those everyday luxuries once traveled thousands of miles along these very routes, passing through the hands of traders who braved bandits, sandstorms, and uncharted wilderness. But while the main arteries of the Silk Road are well documented, countless others faded into obscurity, taking with them stories of lost cities, vanished kingdoms, and entire ways of life. How did these routes vanish? Who walked them last? And what clues have archaeologists and historians uncovered that might lead us back to them? This isn't just a journey through maps and ruins. It's a detective story, one where every crumbling waystone and ancient ledger holds a piece of the puzzle. From the icy passes of the Pamirs to the shifting dunes of the Taklamakan Desert, these lost routes were more than just trails for commerce. They were the threads that wove together the fate of civilizations, influencing everything from language and religion to art and warfare. And as we piece together their secrets, we'll uncover why their disappearance still matters today. So, grab your virtual compass. We're about to retrace the steps of history's most elusive traders and the trails they left behind. Hidden deep in the windswept deserts of northwestern China lies one of the Silk Road's most legendary and treacherous forgotten paths, the Jade Gate Passage. Named for the precious stone that fueled its trade, this route was far more than a simple merchant trail. It was the ultimate frontier, a narrow corridor through the brutal Taklamakan Desert where caravans faced blistering heat, ruthless bandits, and the ever-present threat of vanishing into the dunes without a trace. The Jade Gate wasn't just a trade route, it was a lifeline for empires, stretching from Dunhuang, a thriving oasis city, westward into the heart of Central Asia. This passage became the choke point for China's most coveted exports, silk, of course, but also gleaming jade, revered as the stone of heaven. Imperial inspectors once guarded its namesake gate, taxing every caravan and checking travel permits stamped on wooden slips, some of which survive today, telling stories of merchants from Samarkand, Persia, and beyond. But why did such a vital artery fade into history? The answer lies in the land itself. Shifting sands swallowed entire sections of the route, while political upheavals like the fall of the Han dynasty left it unprotected. Yet the most haunting clues come from the skeletons and abandoned cargo found along the trail. Archaeologists have uncovered bundles of silk frozen in time, coins spilled in haste, and even the remains of camels that collapsed under their loads. These weren't just traders, they were gamblers betting their lives against a landscape that showed no mercy. Perhaps the most poignant relic is a single letter found tucked in the ruins of a watchtower. Written by a homesick soldier stationed at the Jade Gate, it pleads for warm clothes and news from home, proof that even in this barren outpost, human longing endured. Today, all that remains are crumbling fortifications and the whispers of the wind. But for centuries, this was where East and West exchanged not just goods, but dreams carved from jade and woven in silk. Now, let's turn our gaze to another ghostly highway of the ancient world, the Tarim Basin Loop, a circular lifeline that once skirted the deadly embrace of the Taklamakan Desert. Unlike the Jade Gate's linear march, this route was a sprawling ring of oasis towns, each a glittering jewel in a sea of sand, where Karust and Treacherous merchants bartered not just goods, but languages, religions, and even DNA. Imagine caravans winding through this loop like clockwork, stopping at towns with names straight from legend. Kucha, Cotton, Turfan, places where you could hear a dozen languages in a single market and find Buddhist temples standing shoulder to shoulder with Zoroastrian fire altars. What makes this route truly unforgettable are the secrets pulled from its sands. Take the Tarim mummies, tall, red-haired figures buried in felt and wool. Their features so startlingly European that early archaeologists assumed they'd stumbled onto a lost Roman outpost. These weren't misplaced foreigners, though. They were likely the Treacherians, a people who spoke a language closer to Celtic than Chinese, and whose tapestries still blaze with vibrant dyes after 2,000 years. Their very presence rewrote history, proving this was no backwater, but a cultural crossroads where East and West blended long before the Silk Road's golden age. Yet the loop's downfall reads like an environmental thriller. As the climate shifted, rivers that fed the oases vanished underground like ghosts. The Han and Tang dynasties' collapse left the region fractured, and without imperial protection, bandits and rival kingdoms picked the route clean. By the time Marco Polo passed through, many towns were already half buried. Their libraries of wooden documents, shopping lists, love letters, even divorce decrees slowly crumbling in the dry air. Today, satellite images reveal the loop's skeletal outline, faint trails connecting the ruins of shrines and caravanserais, where the wind still hums with the echoes of 1,000 forgotten dialects. Perhaps the most haunting relic, a single wooden tablet from Nia, a once thriving oasis. On it, a farmer scrawled a plea for water rights as his well ran dry, a stark reminder that even the mightiest trade routes were at the mercy of the earth itself. The Tarim Basin Loop didn't just fade, it was erased by the very landscape it once conquered. High in the thin air of the Pamir Mountains, where the sky scrapes the earth, traders once navigated a labyrinth of trails so perilous they were known as the Paths of the Frozen Dead. These weren't just alternate routes, they were desperate gambles, shortcuts through the roof of the world that allowed caravans to bypass the Taklamakan's killer dunes. But the trade-off was brutal. Imagine leading a line of shaggy Bactrian camels along cliff edges narrower than a man's outstretched arms, where a single misstep could send you tumbling into abysses so deep the bodies of fallen travelers were preserved by ice for centuries. What made these trails worth the risk? Time. Crossing the Taklamakan could take months, but the Pamir passes like the infamous Erkishtam or the Wakjir, now straddling modern Afghanistan and China, could slash weeks off the journey. Tibetan horse dealers and Kashmiri wool merchants thrived here, acting as middlemen who knew every crevasse and avalanche chute. They traded in whispers, warning caravans of rockfalls triggered by melting glaciers or bandit clans who'd wait until travelers were weakened by altitude sickness before striking. The real genius of these routes lay in their secrecy. Unlike the Jade Gate or Tarim Basin, which depended on imperial protection, the Pamir trails were anarchic freeways. No taxes, no inspections, just a brutal meritocracy where survival meant memorizing the landscape like a living map. Traders developed their own sign language to communicate across howling winds, and they buried caches of supplies under rock cairns for the return trip. Some of these stashes still survive today, packed with rusted lanterns and mildewed saddlebags, yet these trails didn't just fade, they were deliberately erased. When Soviet and Chinese borders hardened in the 20th century, ancient passes became military zones. The Wakjir, once trodden by Marco Polo's envoys, is now patrolled by drones, and the Erkishtam stone bridges have crumbled into glacial streams. Satellite images reveal ghostly switchbacks etched into mountainsides, but the real tragedy lies in the lost knowledge. Without the Kashmiri guides who memorized avalanche patterns or the Tibetan monks who used yak butter to mark safe paths, modern climbers find these trails lethally unpredictable. A single artifact captures the Pamir's forgotten spirit, a frozen mummy discovered near the Erkishtam Pass, still wearing a felt hat stitched with Sogdian script. In his pouch, a handful of Sichuan peppercorns, proof that even in this lethal wilderness, the pull of spice and profit was stronger than fear. Far to the west of the Jade Gate, where the Tian Shan and Pamir mountains cradle a stretch of land so fertile it was called the Pearl of Central Asia, the Ferghana Valley corridor thrummed with the hoofbeats of history. This wasn't just a trade route. It was the birthplace of legends where the Han dynasty's obsession with a single breed of horse sparked wars, espionage, and one of the most lopsided trade deals in ancient history. The prize, the so-called heavenly horses, towering steeds said to sweat blood and outrun the wind, capable of turning the tide of battles against nomadic invaders. To understand the valley's power, picture a land where apricot orchards and vineyards sprawled beneath snow-capped peaks fed by glacial rivers. Merchants from Parthia, India, and the Greco-Bactrian kingdoms flocked here, not just for horses but for its lapis lazuli, rhubarb, and wines so prized that amphorae from Ferghana have been found as far as Rome. Yet it was the horses that made emperors desperate. When Han scouts first saw these animals larger and swifter than any in China, they reported back that the beasts were descended from dragons, their flanks streaked with what looked like blood, likely a parasitic sweat that gave them their mythic reputation. The Han dynasty's pursuit of these horses reads like a geopolitical thriller. Emperor Wu sent envoys laden with gold and silk, only to be rebuffed by the valley's fiercely independent city-states. One failed expedition ended with a Han ambassador executed and his gifts stolen. The emperor's response, a military campaign so brutal it shattered the valley's peace for generations. His armies besieged Ferghana's capital for 40 days, not for territory but for 3,000 horses, a demand that reveals just how much empires were willing to gamble for an edge in warfare. But the corridor's fate wasn't sealed by conquest alone. As the Silk Road's balance of power shifted, Ferghana became a battleground for Kushans, Sogdians, and later Arab invaders. Each wave of conflict choked the trade routes further until the valley's famous horses were scattered, its cities fading into obscurity. Today, archaeologists uncovering Han-era coins in Uzbek soil or studying petroglyphs of mounted warriors are left to wonder. Was it the horses that made the route legendary, or the ruthless ambition they inspired? A single tomb painting from Chang'an offers a clue: a Ferghana stallion, forever frozen in mid-gallop, carrying the dreams of an empire that gambled everything for speed. Deep in the shadowy embrace of the Caspian Sea's southern coast, where the air hangs thick with the scent of damp earth and ancient cypress, the Hyrcanian Jungle Paths slithered like a hidden serpent through one of the planet's oldest forests. This wasn't a road of open deserts or mountain passes. It was a smuggler's dream, a tangled network of trails where the very trees seemed to conspire with merchants to hide their cargo from prying eyes. While the rest of the Silk Road flaunted its caravans and grand bazaars, the Hyrcanian route thrived on silence, moving timber, spices, and even exotic animals under a canopy so dense that sunlight barely touched the ground. The jungle's secrecy was its greatest asset. Persian tax collectors, notorious for their heavy levies on trade goods, rarely ventured into these woods where tigers still prowled and legends spoke of spirits guarding the trees. Local guides, often former poachers, knew how to navigate the labyrinth, leading mule trains laden with fragrant sandalwood, sacks of cumin and coriander, and even live leopards destined for royal menageries. One 10th-century geographer, Istakri, wrote of encountering merchants who spoke in whistles, not words, using bird calls to signal approaching danger. Their cargo was so valuable and their methods so covert that some scholars believe the Hyrcanian route moved more saffron than any other path, yet left almost no trace in official records. But the jungle demanded its price. Unlike deserts where routes vanished under sand, here the earth itself seemed to rebel against human intrusion. Flash floods wiped out trails overnight, and roots cracked the stones of waymarkers within years. The very spices traders carried, like the prized asafoetida, a pungent resin used in medicine, were harvested from plants that choked abandoned paths within decades. By the time Mongol invasions disrupted trade networks in the 13th century, the jungle had already begun reclaiming its territory, swallowing villages and caravanserais whole. Modern LiDAR scans reveal ghostly clearings where taverns once stood, their floors now buried under 6 feet of leaf litter. Perhaps the most haunting relic of this lost route isn't a ruin or artifact, but a living witness, a 400-year-old Persian ironwood tree near the village of Gaza Khan. Its trunk bears strange, deliberate scars at exactly the height of a camel's load, where generations of ropes wore grooves into the bark as traders paused to rest in its shade. Today, those marks are the only visible proof that one of history's most shadowy trade arteries ever existed at all. While most Silk Road routes conjure images of camels plodding through deserts, the Oxus River Network tells a different story, one written in currents and silt. The Amu Darya, known to ancients as the Oxus, wasn't just a river. It was a liquid highway where boats laden with grain, timber, and precious stones moved with a speed and efficiency no caravan could match. Picture this: fleets of reed rafts and wooden barges drifting past fortified trading posts like Termiz and Amul. Their hulls weighted down with cargoes so heavy they'd be impossible to carry overland. Whole logs of ebony, sacks of millet taller than a man, and raw blocks of lapis lazuli glowing like fragments of the midnight sky. The genius of the Oxus route lay in its economy of motion. While desert caravans required hundreds of camels and weeks of provisions, a single river barge could transport 50 tons of goods with just a handful of crew. Local boatmen who passed navigation techniques down through generations knew every eddy and sandbank from the Pamirs to the Aral Sea. They timed journeys to seasonal floods, riding the spring meltwaters like nature's own freight train. The river's bounty even shaped empires. The Greco-Bactrian kings built their capital at Ai-Khanoum on its banks, where divers still recover Hellenistic coins from the riverbed, dropped by merchants paying tolls 2,000 years ago. Yet the Oxus had a fickle side. Unlike roads carved into earth, this route was constantly redrawn by the river itself. A single flood could silt up a bustling port like Zam, forcing traders to abandon warehouses mid-season. The death blow came from both nature and man. Around the 13th century, the river began shifting its course westward, leaving once thriving docks stranded miles from water. Then came the Mongols, who didn't just conquer, they dismantled. Genghis Khan's armies systematically destroyed the irrigation canals that sustained riverside towns, turning fertile trade hubs into dust bowls. At Peikand, archaeologists found warehouses still stacked with unused ceramic jars, as if merchants had fled mid-transaction. The river's final act of betrayal was poetic. As the Oxus retreated, it swallowed its own history. Ports that weren't left high and dry were submerged under new channels. Today, Soviet-era dams have drowned the last visible traces, but occasionally, drought exposes a ghostly shoreline where pottery shards and rusted anchors lie scattered like breadcrumbs. One such find near Turkmenabat revealed something haunting. A child's leather shoe perfectly preserved in the mud, its stitching still tight. Was it lost in a storm or dropped as a family boarded a boat to flee invaders? The Oxus keeps its secrets, flowing now as it did then, silent witness to the trade route that water built and water erased. North of the Taklamakan's deathly embrace, where the desert's heat could melt the nails off a sandal, a shadow route slithered like a mirage along the Tian Shan foothills, the Northern Bypass. This wasn't a road for honest merchants hauling silk under imperial permits. It was a smuggler's alley where the only rule was survival, and the price of getting caught was a head on a spike. Traders who chose this path weren't just avoiding the desert's wrath. They were dodging tax collectors who patrolled the main routes with scales and ledgers, skimming profits from every bolt of fabric and bale of tea. The bypass had one brutal advantage: distance. While the southern routes baked under the sun, the northern trail offered sporadic springs and the shelter of rocky outcrops. But the land was a traitor. Sudden sandstorms could bury a caravan in hours, leaving only a lone camel's bell tinkling under the dunes to mark their grave. Archaeologists have found entire merchant parties mummified in situ, their bodies curled around sacks of peppercorns, fingers still clutching prayer beads. At the ruins of Lulan, a ghost town swallowed by shifting sands, a single ledger survived in a monastery's rubble. It lists tariffs paid in smuggled jade, proving even tax evasion left paper trails. Buddhist monks were the unlikely heroes of this lawless route. Their monasteries, perched like beacons at oases like Kizil and Kumchara, doubled as safe houses. Traders could stash goods in hidden cellars beneath temple floors, swapping cargo for donations that conveniently matched the tax rate they'd avoided. The caves of Kizil still bear murals of blue-eyed demons clutching sacks, possibly a cheeky nod to the tax collectors the monks outwitted. One fresco even shows a merchant whispering to a monk while a Bactrian camel laden with unmarked bundles waits outside. Yet the desert always had the last word. As dynasties crumbled, maintenance of the few wells and markers ceased. Dunes swallowed stone pillars carved with distance markers, and the monasteries themselves were abandoned when patronage dried up. Today, satellite images reveal faint, zigzagging lines in the deserts crust the last whispers of a route built on cunning and buried by time, the most haunting find. A stash of Sogdian letters near Dunhuang, their ink still legible after 12 centuries. One pleads, "Do not take the northern road, the sands have teeth." Too late, the writer's seal was found in a mass grave 50 miles west, still tied to a skeletal wrist. High in the knife-edged peaks of the Hindu Kush, where glaciers grown under their own weight and blizzards can swallow whole caravans in minutes, traders once danced with death for the chance to move the most exquisite treasures of the ancient world. These weren't just mountain trails, they were nature's own vaults, unlocking passage between the gem mines of India and the silk markets of Central Asia. To cross them was to gamble with the elements. One misstep could send a man tumbling into crevices so deep locals claimed they led to the underworld, while avalanches routinely buried entire mule trains without a trace. Yet for those who timed it right, narrowing their journeys to the fleeting summer months when ice bridges stabilized, the rewards were unparalleled. Imagine a single Bactrian camel, its saddlebags straining with uncut emeralds from the Swat Valley, or bundles of Kashmir's famed Shottush wool, so fine a shawl could pass through a wedding ring. The real masters of these routes weren't merchants but the indigenous Kyrgyz and Wakai horsemen who could read the mountains like a language. They knew which passes harbored, singing glaciers, ice fields that emitted eerie hums as they shifted, signaling imminent collapse, and where to find secret hot springs to thaw frozen limbs. Their stories wove a mythology around the peaks, tales of the Yeti, or Métis, described not as a monster but as a guardian spirit whose footprints in the snow warned of unstable routes. European explorers like Aurel Stein later mocked these accounts until they faced the mountains themselves and returned with frostbitten fingers and newfound respect. What truly sealed the fate of these routes, though, wasn't nature but the ambitions of empires. When the British and Russian empires began their great game in the 19th century, the Hindu Kush became a chessboard. Spies disguised as pilgrims mapped the passes, while warlords like Afghanistan's Amir Abdur Rahman deliberately collapsed key tunnels to thwart invaders. By the time Soviet helicopters began patrolling the heights in the 1980s, centuries-old trade networks had fractured beyond repair. Today, satellite images reveal ghostly switchbacks still etched into glaciers, paths that once pulsed with life now silent but for the wind. One poignant artifact survives in a Kabul museum, a wooden crate of uncut lapis lazuli, abandoned mid-journey during a 19th century border skirmish, its contents spilling onto the floor like frozen tears of the mountain itself. Where the Volga River spills into the Caspian Sea, a forgotten highway once pulsed with life, not of silk or spices, but of salt-crusted fishing boats and merchant ships groaning under mounds of dried sturgeon. The Caspian Sea coastal track was the Silk Road's eccentric cousin, a route where fortunes were measured in fish eggs rather than jade, and where a single storm could rewrite maps overnight. This wasn't just a path along the water's edge. It was a liquid labyrinth where nomads, pirates, and the enigmatic Khazar cognate played a high-stakes game of control over the world's most valuable caviar. The Khazars, a semi-nomadic empire that ruled these shores from the 7th to 10th centuries, didn't just tax this trade, they weaponized it. Their capital, Atil, stood where the Volga met the Caspian like a sentinel, its docks stacked with amphorae of brined beluga. What made them geniuses of commerce was their tolerance. Jewish merchants from Constantinople, Muslim traders from Baghdad, and pagan Slavs all bargained under Khazar protection, paying duties not in coin but in salt, a commodity so precious it was literally worth its weight in silver. Archaeologists digging near Derbent, a fortified Khazar port, found ledger stones etched with fish and salt shakers, proof of an economy built on flavor and preservation. But the sea was always the real ruler here. Unlike desert routes where landmarks stayed put, the Caspian's coastline shifted like a living thing. Villages recorded in Arab geographers' accounts now lie underwater, victims of rising sea levels that swallowed entire ports between the 10th and 14th centuries. At the ruins of Saxon, a once bustling trade hub, divers have found fish bones packed so densely in the sediment that they form undulating white layers, ghostly evidence of a million meals salted and shipped. The same waters that gave life took it away. When the Khazar Empire collapsed, their enemies didn't burn Atil, the Caspian did, drowning the city beneath 16 feet of water during a catastrophic surge. Pirates thrived in this chaos. The Caspian lacked the naval patrols of the Mediterranean, making it a playground for raiders like the Rus Vikings, who portaged their longships from the Baltic to plunder fishing fleets. A Byzantine chronicle describes how these marauders strung up nets not to catch fish, but to snare fleeing merchant boats, stripping them of salt and caviar before scuttling them. The most chilling relic of this era, a shipwreck near Baku, its hull packed with Caspian seal bones, likely a pirate vessel that hunted both beasts and men. Today, the track's legacy lingers in unexpected places. In Astrakhan, chefs still cure sturgeon using 8th century Khazar methods, and satellite images reveal submerged stone wharves stretching like fingers beneath the waves. But the true epitaph might be a single salt-caked amphora pulled from the delta mud, its interior still shimmering with traces of golden roe, a taste of the luxury that once fueled an empire now dissolved into the brackish water. Beneath the Gobi Desert's endless horizon, where the wind sculpts dunes into waves of rust-colored silence, whispers of a ghostly trade network still linger. These weren't the grand, imperial highways of the Silk Road's golden age. They were the covert trails of nomadic tribes, etched into the earth by the hooves of Bactrian camels and the stealth of merchants who traded under the radar. Unlike the bustling oasis towns of the Taklamakan, the Gobi's routes were survivalist masterpieces, threading between hidden springs and rock formations known only to local guides. A single misstep could mean death. Waterholes vanished overnight, swallowed by drifting sands, while summer temperatures soared high enough to melt lead. The nomads who mastered this landscape didn't just navigate it, they negotiated with it. Their caravans moved like shadows, following stars and the flight patterns of desert birds rather than fixed paths. Camels loaded with lightweight but priceless cargo blocks of tea compressed into bricks, bundles of fox fur, and rare medicinal herbs like ephedra could go days without water, their humps shrinking and swelling like living canteens. Archaeologists have found caches of Tibetan turquoise and Tang dynasty mirrors along these trails, buried beneath cairns as if the earth itself were a secret ledger. But the most telling clues are the petroglyphs, crude carvings of camels and mounted archers on canyon walls, often accompanied by tallies that likely recorded tolls paid in silence. What doomed these routes wasn't the desert's cruelty, but the modern world's hunger for what lay beneath. The Gobai's vast coal and copper deposits, once irrelevant to nomads, became targets for industrial mining in the 20th century. Gigantic excavators gouged the landscape, obliterating ancient trails under pits hundreds of feet deep. Satellite images from the 1970s show the moment it happened, a spiderweb of faint tracks suddenly severed by the geometric scars of open pit mines. In Mongolia's South Gobi province, a single mining operation erased a network of paths that had connected Tibetan monasteries with Siberian reindeer herders for centuries. Yet the desert fights back. Sandstorms regularly bury mining equipment, and shifting dunes have reclaimed some abandoned sites, as if the land remembers its older purpose. Near the ruins of Karakoto, a sand-blasted Tangut fortress, herders still point out camel stones, weathered rocks once used to tether animals during stealthy midnight trades. And sometimes, after a rare rain, the hardened clay of dry lake beds yields its secrets, the fossilized footprints of a caravan caught mid-stride, as if the ghosts of the Gobai's traders are still marching toward some invisible oasis. Flowing like a ribbon of liquid metal through the heart of Central Asia, the Sirdarya River once carried more than water. It was a conduit for empires, its currents thick with silver ingots and the finest ceramics of the Samarkand kiln. Known to ancient geographers as the Jaxartes, this riverine highway didn't just connect cities. It fused cultures, with Scythian nomads trading alongside Persian merchants and Chinese envoys in a rare harmony of mutual need. The secret to its power lay beneath the earth, vast silver deposits near the Tian Shan foothills, where mines operated by enslaved prisoners produced coins that would circulate from Constantinople to Chang'an. The Scythians, those fearsome horseback archers of the steppes, were the route's unlikely custodians. Though they famously distrusted cities, they controlled key river crossings, taxing barges laden with silver in exchange for safe passage. Their burial mounds, or kurgans, along the Sirdarya's banks reveal a startling duality. Golden horse ornaments lie beside Han Dynasty mirrors and Greek amphorae, proving even nomads couldn't resist the river's cosmopolitan pull. At Chilpik, a Zoroastrian tower of silence overlooks the water, where Sogdian traders once exposed their dead to vultures in rituals that horrified visiting Buddhist monks. But the silver veins ran dry by the 10th century, and with them the river's prestige. The Karakhanids, a Turkic dynasty, repurposed the mines as prisons, while ceramics replaced metal as the prime cargo. Excavations at Otrar, a bustling river port, unearthed kilns producing turquoise-glazed bowls so delicate they rang like bells when struck, a technology likely stolen from Chinese artisans during Tang-era skirmishes. These ceramics traveled north to Siberian tribes, who traded sable pelts in return, creating a loop of luxury that bypassed the collapsing silk markets farther south. The Sirdarya's final betrayal came not from nature but from Soviet engineers. Mid-20th century irrigation schemes diverted the river into cotton fields, shrinking its flow to a trickle. Satellite images show the grim transformation, where barges once docked at cities like Turkestan, now only salt-encrusted canals remain. The Aral Sea, once the river's terminus, became a dust bowl, stranding fishing villages miles from water. Yet one artifact survives as a bitter joke, a silver coin minted in 8th century Samarkand, dredged from the dried delta in 1989. Its inscription: "May this river never thirst. Where the air grows thin and the horizon bends into the curve of the earth, the Tian Shan sky roads carved a path through peaks so high they were called the Celestial Mountains." This wasn't a route for the faint-hearted. It was a vertical labyrinth where trader and falcon soared side by side, where ice bridges groaned under the weight of precious herbs, and where the earth itself could shatter without warning. Picture a 12th century Nestorian monk, his robes flapping like wings against the wind. carefully leading a donkey laden with sacks of dried snow lotus, a flower so rare it was said to cure any ailment, if only you could survive the climb to pluck it. The real currency of these heights wasn't silk or silver, but feathers and roots. Trained hunting falcons, especially the legendary Altai golden eagles, commanded prices exceeding a king's ransom in Baghdad and Constantinople. Merchants transported them in bamboo cages strapped to their backs, the birds eerily silent in the thin air, their eyes locked on distant horizons. Meanwhile, herb collectors combed glacial moraines for sky gold, rhodiola, and cordyceps mushrooms that thrived only above 12,000 feet. A single pouch of these could buy a vineyard in Samarkand, but harvesting them meant dangling from yak hair ropes over crevices where a misstep meant vanishing into blue ice. The Nestorian Christians, an ancient sect exiled from Byzantium, became the unlikely kings of this vertical trade. Their monasteries clung to cliffs like swallows' nests, offering shelter and scribes who documented trades in Syriac script on birch bark scrolls. One such scroll, discovered in a cave near Lake Issyk-Kul, lists a startling exchange: one white gyrfalcon, untrained, for 7 bolts of Chinese damask and 2 silver crosses. These monks weren't just spiritual guides. They were alpine brokers, negotiating between Mongol khans and Persian physicians with the cool pragmatism of men who prayed on the edge of oblivion. Yet the mountains always held the upper hand. The Sky Road's infamous ice bridges, some spanning chasms wider than a cathedral, were nature's cruel joke. Formed by compacted snowdrifts, they could support a caravan at dawn and collapse by noon. Travelers whispered of singing bridges that emitted eerie harmonic vibrations before giving way. At the Musart Pass, archaeologists found a frozen horror, an entire Sogdian merchant train preserved mid-plunge, their terrified faces turned upward, arms still clutching sacks of saffron that stained the ice like liquid sunset. Seismic activity finished what gravity started. The Tyne Shan sits where the Indian and Eurasian plates grind like millstones, producing quakes that could reroute rivers overnight. In 1347, a tremor severed the main access to the Ferghana Valley, stranding a Nestorian trading post so completely that its occupants resorted to eating their ledger parchments. Satellite imagery now reveals ghostly switchbacks trails that simply stop at sheer cliffs, their continuations sheared off by landslides. Perhaps the most haunting relic of the sky roads isn't buried in ice, but kept in a Kyrgyz herder's yurt near Naran, a falcon hood stitched from Sogdian silk, its leather straps still bearing the sweat stains of a trainer long turned to dust. The feathers tucked inside aren't golden eagle but phoenix, mythical proof that even in these fatal heights, humans dared to trade in the impossible. Sharp as a dagger's edge between the peaks of the Hindu Kush and Karakoram, the Khyber-Karakoram shortcut was the Silk Road's ultimate gamble, a razor-thin corridor where traders traded safety for speed, shaving months off journeys between India and China by daring to bypass the Pamirs entirely. This wasn't a route, it was a gauntlet where every twist in the trail hid either a bandit's blade or a rockslide's wrath. The math was brutal but irresistible. Where the Pamir routes took 3 months, this path could be cleared in weeks if you survived the tax collectors of the Kafiristan warlords, the avalanches of the Babusar Pass, and the sheer cliffs where unlucky caravans left behind a grisly trail of shattered carts and sun-bleached bones. Bandit kingdoms didn't just haunt this route, they built entire economies around it. The Yusufzai tribesmen, masters of guerrilla taxation, strung chains across narrow gorges, lowering them only after extracting payments in musk, indigo, or weapons. One British officer's diary from 1845 describes a macabre toll system at the Landi-Kotal Pass. They do not take coin, but fingers 1 joint per mule, snipped clean with shears if the silver is light. These weren't random outlaws but sophisticated operators. Their strongholds doubled as bustling markets where stolen goods were re-sold to the same merchants they'd robbed weeks prior. Archaeologists still find their receipts, notched bones tossed into offering pits near shrines to their warrior saint Per-Roshan. The British Empire's obsession with taming this route reads like a comedy of errors. After annexing Punjab in 1849, they poured troops and explosives into pacifying the Khyber, only to face a humiliating truth: the locals knew the land like their own breath. Tribal marksmen could pick off redcoats from half a mile away, while their women and children dismantled railroad tracks as fast as the British laid them. A single engineering report from 1873 admits defeat with startling honesty. The hills themselves resist us, tunnels collapse, bridges twist like paper, and the very stones seem to roll back into place overnight. The ultimate insult, the British-built Khyber Railway, completed in 1925 at staggering cost, was so slow and vulnerable to sabotage that traders kept using the bandit trails instead. Modernity brought new conflicts to this ancient shortcut. When India and Pakistan partitioned in 1947, the route became a militarized nightmare, its key passes like the 5,000-meter-high Punjab transformed into battlegrounds. Today, satellite images show a landscape scarred by bunkers and landmines, where smugglers navigate using moonlight to avoid thermal drones, yet the land refuses to be tamed. In 2015, a Chinese road crew attempting to widen the Karakoram Highway uncovered a 4th-century Sogdian trading post perfectly preserved under glacial ice, its wooden tablets still cursing the thieves of the high passes in smudged ink. Even now, the shortcut demands payment. Trucks carrying goods between China and Pakistan must hire rock spotters to sprint ahead and listen for the telltale creaks of impending landslides, a job with a life expectancy shorter than a medieval archer's. The route's epitaph might be etched in an unexpected place, a graffiti-covered shipping container at the Torkham border crossing. Beneath layers of spray paint, someone once scrawled in Pashto, "Here lies the road that ate empires." Time has blurred the words, but the truth remains. Where empires crumbled, the stones and the bandits endure. Before the Aral Sea became a symbol of ecological collapse, its shimmering waves sustained a trade so peculiar it sounds like legend, a network built on fish glue and the luck of starving poets. For centuries, fishing villages like Moynak thrived along its shores, their boats hauling in sturgeon so massive it took 3 men to lift them. But the real treasure wasn't the caviar, it was the swim bladders, painstakingly dried and boiled into isinglass, a gelatin so pure it could mend torn manuscripts in Samarkand's libraries or stiffen the silk of imperial gowns in Kyoto. This sticky commodity traveled farther than the fish themselves, traded by Jewish merchants who called it parchment glue and Tang dynasty officials who used it to repair crackled ceramics. The fishing routes here defied normal logic. Instead of following coasts, boats navigated by submerged forests, stands of Saxol trees that drowned when the Amu Darya shifted course centuries earlier. Fishermen used these ghostly landmarks like underwater street signs, dropping weighted nets where the branches grew thickest, knowing sturgeon congregated in their shadows. At night, they'd camp on sandbars that vanished by dawn, telling stories of lake monsters that were really just beluga sturgeon grown to 600 pounds on a diet of shipwrecked melons. Climate change killed this world twice, first slowly, when medieval warming shrank the sea in the 10th century, forcing villagers to abandon Moynak's original harbor, now a bone-dry basin 30 miles from water. Then catastrophically in the 1960s, when Soviet cotton irrigation diverted the Amu Darya entirely. Satellite images show the death spiral, fishing docks left stranded like stairways to nowhere, trawlers rusting in dunes where waves once splashed their hulls. The glue trade died mid-transaction. Archaeologists found warehouses in Nukus still stacked with barrels of unshipped isinglass hardened into amber lumps. Yet the sea keeps one cruel joke alive. Every few years, wind exposes the ruins of Kurdri, a 14th-century fishing town buried under the former seabed. There, pressed into the cracked mud like a fossilized scream, lies the imprint of a sturgeon's tail, the last witness to a route that traded in things more fragile than silk, water, glue, and the patience of men who harvested both. Buried beneath the dust of northern Afghanistan's blistering deserts lies a secret that rewrote art history, a trail of gold so lavish, so improbable it shouldn't exist. Welcome to the Bactrian Gold Highway, where Greco-gods clasp hands with Buddhist bodhisattvas, and where nomad kings turned loot into legacy. Picture this, a golden clasp from Siberia, stamped with the face of Athena, her owl-eyed gaze watching over a Buddha seated in lotus position. Or a Kushan prince's dagger sheath, its surface crawling with vine motifs borrowed from Roman frescoes, yet inscribed in Kharosthi script. This wasn't just trade, it was alchemy, where cultures colluded to forge objects that defied borders and belief systems alike. The Kushan Empire, those stealthy architects of this route, mastered a delicate game. Their coins tell the story. One side shows King Kanishka in a flame-crowned Zoroastrian headdress. The flip side, the Buddha labeled in Greek letters, Bado. They didn't merely tolerate cultural mashups, they weaponized them, commissioning gold reliquaries shaped like Greek amphoras to hold Buddhist relics, ensuring every transaction doubled as spiritual propaganda. Archaeologists still puzzle over a gold belt buckle found near Samarkand. Its surface, a chaotic parade of Eros figures riding Indian elephants. Was it a diplomatic gift? A royal whim, or proof that the Kushans understood gold's universal language better than anyone? But the route's true genius lay in its brutality. The Kushans didn't just move gold, they controlled the mines, from Afghanistan's Badakhshan lapis-studded veins to the Altai Mountains' glacial streams, where Siberian tribes panned for nuggets the size of apricot pits. Their caravans moved like armored convoys, guarded by mercenaries who'd once served under Alexander's generals. At Termez, a border fort's ruins still bear scratches in the stone hasty tallies marking gold bars paid as bribes to Hunnic raiders. The math was coldly pragmatic: lose 10% to bandits or lose it all. Then came the plunderers. When the Taliban ransacked Kabul's museum in 1996, they didn't just smash statues, they erased a roadmap. Among the destroyed artifacts was the Bactrian zodiac, a gilded plate mapping Greek constellations onto Buddhist cosmology. Its loss wasn't merely cultural vandalism, it was the equivalent of burning a merchant's ledger. Yet the land remembers. In 2020, a shepherd near Balkh stumbled upon a clay pot filled with gold appliques, each one a tiny Dionysus mask grinning through a beard of turquoise. The Taliban missed a spot, the highway's final insult, its own success. The Kushans minted so much gold coinage that they inflated economies from Rome to Han China. A single tax record from Loyang complains of Kushan gold too pure to trust, accusing traders of diluting local currencies. Today, satellite imagery reveals ghostly caravan tracks leading to nowhere, mines exhausted, way stations abandoned when the gold ran out. But perhaps the last word belongs to a scrap of silk preserved in Siberia's permafrost, its border embroidered with a line of Kushan script: all that glitters wanders. Even the gold knew it was just passing through. While the Silk Road conjures images of camel trains winding through Asian deserts, few realize its mirror image thrived under the scorching Saharan sun, a parallel world where salt was worth its weight in gold, and the dunes hid trade routes just as intricate and perilous. The Trans-Saharan Network wasn't just a distant cousin to the Silk Road, it was its alter ego, moving identical luxuries in reverse. Silk from China reached Timbuktu, while African gold and ivory flowed eastward. But one critical difference sealed their fates. Where the Silk Road fragmented under political chaos, the Sahara's routes collapsed under something far more relentless: water. Salt was the Sahara's obsession. Caravans of up to 10,000 camels, known as the land ships of the desert, lugged blinding white slabs mined from places like Tagheza, a city literally built from salt blocks where workers traded lifetime blindness from the glare for unimaginable profits. Mansa Musa, the Malian emperor who famously crashed Cairo's gold market in 1324, owed his fortune to these very routes, but the Sahara's real dark mirror to the Silk Road was its human cargo. While Central Asian slave trades existed, none matched the Sahara's scale, a fact etched into the bones of the salt slaves who perished hauling loads across dunes so hot their feet left temporary scars on the sand. Climate was the great divider. Where the Silk Road adapted to shifting politics, the Sahara's routes relied on oases that simply vanished. Medieval manuscripts describe towns like Ayuda Coast, once so lush its date palms fed entire caravans, now buried under 60 feet of sand. Satellite imagery reveals the grim truth. Ancient wells that supported trade for centuries now lie bone dry, their stone linings cracked like eggshells. The final blow came not from nature but from Portuguese caravels. When European ships began circling Africa in the 15th century, they undercut the Sahara's monopoly on gold and slaves, rendering thousand-mile camel treks obsolete overnight. Yet one artifact bridges these twin worlds perfectly, a 14th century map found in Cairo's Geniza archives. Drawn on gazelle skin, it shows the Silk Road and Saharan routes as interlocking circles with a note in Judeo-Arabic: salt answers silk and both taste of tears. Perhaps the real tragedy isn't that one survived while the other faded, but that we remember them as separate stories at all. Deep in the sun-scorched wastes of Uzbekistan's Kizilkum Desert, where the sand isn't golden but black with oxidized metal, a ghostly highway once pulsed with the heartbeat of empires. The Black Sand Desert Copper Trail wasn't just a trade route, it was an ancient arms dealer's dream, supplying the bronze that tipped spears from the Mediterranean to the Yellow River. Every inch of this path bore the scars of industry: slag heaps like crumbling black pyramids, trenches where entire forests once stood to fuel furnaces, and the skeletal remains of smelting pits where temperatures soared high enough to melt stone. The secret to this trail's power lay in a fluke of geology. Unlike most copper deposits buried deep in mountains, the Kizilkum's ore lay shockingly close to the surface, scattered in nuggets the size of fists. Ancient miners didn't need picks, they sifted the black sand like prospectors panning for gold, then hauled their bounty to pit kilns lined with clay. But extracting metal was only half the battle. To transform brittle copper into weapons-grade bronze, they needed tin from distant Afghanistan, sparking a trade so vital that archaeologists have found cuneiform tablets in Mesopotamia pleading for shipments from the land where the sand burns black. The environmental cost was staggering. Each pound of copper demanded 20 pounds of charcoal, leading to deforestation on an industrial scale. Satellite imaging reveals the grim aftermath: concentric rings of barren earth radiating from ancient smelting sites, where every tree within a day's walk was sacrificed to the furnaces. At Zarafshan, a once thriving mining town, researchers found a child's burial from around 1500 BCE, the skeleton's teeth stained green from copper dust, its tiny hands clutching a toy hammer. This wasn't just commerce, it was generational sacrifice written into the land itself. Technology, not war or weather, finally killed the trail. By the Roman era, deep shaft mining in Cyprus and Spain produced purer copper with less fuel. The Kizilkum's surface deposits, once a blessing, became a liability too scattered for efficient large-scale extraction. Slowly, the black sand reclaimed its secrets. Today, Soviet-era uranium mines have erased much of the ancient trail, but in the ruins of Kampa Tepe, a single clue survives: a warehouse floor embedded with countless droplets of molten copper, frozen mid-drip like metallic tears. The desert remembers its role as the arsenal of antiquity, even if the world has forgotten. High in the alpine meadows of the Tyne Shan, where glaciers feed wild thyme-scented valleys, a forgotten tea route once threaded its way north, not with delicate porcelain cups, but with bricks of compressed leaves as hard as stone. The Heavenly Mountains tea path predates China's famous tea horse road by centuries, a rugged trail where Turkic horsemen bartered fermented tea bricks for Kazakh horses, creating an economy built on caffeine and cavalry. Picture this: Uyghur merchants stamping their clan symbols onto tea bricks with enough force to leave permanent indentations, while nomadic buyers tested the quality by snapping chunks off like dark chocolate, chewing the bitter leaves to gauge their potency before handing over their finest steeds. This wasn't just commerce, it was alchemy. The tea, harvested from Yunnan's ancient forests, underwent a transformation so radical it could survive the brutal journey. Workers steamed and pounded leaves into a dense paste, pressing them into molds with iron weights until they resembled roofing tiles. These indestructible bricks became the currency of the steppes, traded slice by slice like edible coins. A 13th century Persian traveler, Ibn Battuta, described the process with awe. They make tea into walls and walls into meals. Kazakh nomads would shave slivers into boiling mare's milk, creating a salty, buttery brew that warmed them through winter nights on the open plain. But the real architects of this route weren't the producers or consumers. They were the Turkic intermediaries, the Diz, Ungar, and Kyrgyz tribes who held the mountain passes like toll-keepers of the clouds. These horsemen didn't just transport tea, they weaponized its value. At strategic way stations like Issyk Kol's stone caravanserais, they'd deliberately delay caravans to create artificial shortages, doubling prices by the time the bricks reached the Kazakh khans. A single ledger from a Dzunga trading post preserved in a dry cave near Almaty records a particularly brazen transaction. 10 horse lengths of tea for 1 stallion. The buyer wept but paid. Then came the Russians. When the Tsarist Empire pushed into Central Asia in the 18th century, they didn't just disrupt the tea trade, they industrialized its destruction. Cossack outposts demanded taxes in silver, not tea, while new railroads undercut the mountain paths. The final insult: Russian merchants began importing cheaper, low-grade tea from India, flooding the market with inferior leaves that lacked the fermented depth of Yunnan's bricks. By 1890, a Kazakh elder lamented to a British ethnographer, "The tea now tastes like boiled grass, and the horses know the difference." Today, fragments of this lost trade cling to existence. In remote Kyrgyz villages, elderly herders still prepare tea the old way, chipping flakes off century-old bricks passed down as heirlooms. And sometimes, when glacial melt exposes high-altitude trails, archaeologists find the ghosts of the route, petrified tea crumbs in the teeth of mummified traders, or the faint scent of camellia leaves lingering in saddlebags reduced to dust. The mountains remember what empires forgot: that once the surest currency between heaven and earth was a brick of leaves stamped with the seal of a vanished world. Where the Caspian Sea's brackish waters bled into a labyrinth of reeds and sucking mud, one of history's most audacious smuggling operations played out in near silence. The Caspian Silk Swamp Route was the underworld of the Silk Road, a shifting, waterlogged maze where contraband silk moved under the noses of Sassanid tax collectors, its paths known only to marsh dwellers and desperate merchants. These weren't roads, but secrets written in water, where a single misstep could bury a man and his cargo in quicks, and disguised as solid ground. Local folklore still whispers of the marsh that eats gold, referring not to treasure, but to the silk-laden corpses swallowed whole when their guides betrayed them for a double share. The Sassanid Empire's silk monopoly was airtight, or so they thought. By levying crushing tariffs at official crossings like Derbent, they forced merchants to get creative. Enter the reed walkers, gangs of Khazar and Hunnic smugglers who navigated the wetlands using tricks straight from nature. They strapped bundles of silk to inflated goat bladders, letting the cargo float just beneath the water's surface while they waded ahead, testing the ground with weighted poles. Byzantine chronicles describe their most ingenious tactic: training cormorants to dive with lightweight silk samples tied to their legs, scouting safe routes ahead like feathered spies. But the real puppet masters were Byzantine intelligence agents who turned this soggy anarchy into geopolitical leverage. Disguised as Armenian monks, they mapped the swamp's safe passages, then sold the information to Sassanid rebels and Khazar warlords alike. A 6th century codex found in Constantinople's ruins contains what scholars now believe was a smuggler's crib sheet, a list of code words like green path for stable routes and black honey for deadly quicksand zones. The Byzantines didn't just use the swamp, they weaponized its chaos, destabilizing Persian control by ensuring smugglers always stayed one step ahead. Modern land reclamation has buried most of the evidence under cotton fields and oil pipelines, but satellite imaging reveals ghostly contours of the old waterways. In 2019, construction near Astrakhan unearthed a macabre snapshot of the route's dangers. 12 skeletons, their bones still wrapped in waterlogged silk, found standing upright in what was once a quicksand pit. Their hands clutch rope fragments, perhaps the remains of a doomed rescue attempt. Nearby lay the route's truest epitaph, a bronze Sassanid tax seal never used, its cord snapped in two. Even the marsh knew some things were never meant to be taxed. In the heart of the Taklamakan Desert, where sandstorms erase entire landscapes in hours, a different kind of treasure once moved in silence, not silk or spices, but sacred words painted on palm leaves and whispered in forgotten tongues. The Tarim Basin's Buddhist circuit was a pilgrimage of parchment, where monasteries like beacon fires dotted the desert's edge, connected by trails trodden bare by monks carrying sutras in satchels lined with wolf fur to ward off demons. Imagine the scene. A Sogdian artist in Kucha mixing lapis lazuli with camel's milk to illuminate a Sanskrit manuscript, while a Treacherous translator in Dunhuang struggles to render the Buddha's teachings into a language already fading from memory. The lifeline of this circuit wasn't gold but paper. Dunhuang's Mogao caves, a honeycomb of nearly 500 hand-carved chambers, became the ultimate safe deposit box for Buddhist art. Here, monks sealed away 50,000 manuscripts in a single hidden library, everything from diamond sutras printed with wooden blocks, the world's oldest surviving printed book, to shopping lists for monastery supplies. The most poignant, a prayer scroll stained with tear marks, left by a mother begging the Buddha to spare her child from smallpox. These caves weren't just archives, they were time capsules of desperation and devotion, preserved by the desert's dry breath. Islam's spread across Central Asia didn't just change rulers, it rewrote the landscape of faith, as wave after wave of conversion swept through the Tarim Basin in the 10th to 14th centuries. Buddhist monasteries faced an impossible choice: adapt or vanish. At Bezeklik near Turfan, murals show the eerie transition Buddhas with their faces scratched out, their halos repainted with Quranic verses in flowing Arabic script. Some monks fled eastward carrying their libraries on donkey carts, while others buried texts in sealed urns, hoping future generations might resurrect them. A single Kashgari chronicle from the period captures the moment with chilling brevity. The idols wept as their temples became mosques, but the sand drank their tears. Modern archaeology keeps pulling whispers from the desert. In 2010, carbonized manuscripts surfaced near Cotton, scrolls someone tried to burn during the Islamization period, only for the fire to smolder out, preserving charred but legible pages. Then there's the Dead Monk's Cache, discovered in 2018 when a goat herder's foot plunged through a hidden chamber near Kizil. Inside, 11 mummified monks sat cross-legged around a birch-bark library, their lips sewn shut with gold thread, a final vow of silence to protect the texts. One parchment, painstakingly unrolled, contained a startling map: the 12 hidden ways, routes to sanctuary caves unknown to modern historians. Perhaps the circuit's true legacy lies in its stubborn refusal to die completely. At Sabashi's ruined monasteries, Uyghur grandmothers still tie prayer rags to ancient stupas, blending Buddhist and Islamic traditions. And in Dunhuang's research institutes, scholars pore over manuscripts using hyperspectral imaging, revealing text scraped away and rewritten palimpsests of faith where one religion literally lies beneath another. The desert may have buried the roads, but the words endure, waiting for the next curious mind to brush off the sand. Stretching from the frost-kissed shores of the Baltic to the jade palaces of Han China, the steppe amber roads carved an improbable path through landscapes so vast they defied logic. Picture this, a lump of golden resin, pried from the North Sea's icy grip by Baltic divers, passing through a dozen hands, Sarmatian horsemen who traded it for Siberian furs, Sogdian merchants who smuggled it past Parthian tax collectors, and finally, Han officials who buried it with emperors as dragon's tears, believing it could preserve flesh for eternity. This wasn't just trade, it was alchemy, turning northern sunlight into a currency of myth. The Sarmatians, those nomadic middlemen of the Eurasian steppe, turned markup into an art form. A single amber bead worth a sheep near the Vistula River could buy a warhorse by the time it reached the Caspian, and by Chang'an it might trade for a chest of Sichuan peppercorns. Their ledgers, scratched onto birch bark and hidden in burial mounds, reveal the calculus of greed. For one sun stone the size of a sparrow's egg, take 3 Armenian carpets or 2 Indian ivory tusks. But the real profit lay in storytelling. By the time Baltic raw amber reached China, Sarmatian traders had spun tales of it being the petrified tears of Apollo or fragments of the sun god's chariot. Myths so potent that Han nobles paid in silver by weight, not quality. Amber's spiritual value in China bordered on obsession. Han Dynasty aristocrats placed carved amber cicadas under the tongues of the dead, believing the insect's song could guide souls through the afterlife. Excavations at Mawangdui revealed a noblewoman buried with an amber necklace, each bead hollowed to hold mercury, an attempt to merge its preservative magic with quicksilver's legendary immortality properties. The most extravagant example, a 1st century BC prince's tomb, contained an amber inlaid saddle, its resin still sticky where craftsmen had melted it to adhere to the leather, proving some caravans moved faster than chemistry. Then came the Vikings, those pirates of the north who hijacked the route with brutal efficiency. By the 9th century, Norse longships began raiding Baltic amber-gathering villages, cutting out the Sarmatian middlemen entirely. They traded directly with Volga-Bulgar merchants, who funneled the loot eastward via the Caspian, a detour that starved the steppe routes of their golden lifeblood. A runestone near Gotland boasts of a single raid yielding 40 fists of sun stone, enough to buy a chieftain's fleet. The Sarmatians fought back with scorched earth tactics, burning grassland trading posts to blacken the Vikings' maps, but the damage was done. By the time Marco Polo encountered Baltic amber in Karakorum, it arrived via Siberian sledges, its old steppe highway reduced to a memory whispered between camel drivers. Today, satellite imagery reveals the ghostly outlines of way stations buried under Kazakh wheat fields, while Han-era amber cicadas gathered dust in museum cases. But perhaps the route's true epitaph lies in a single artifact, a Sarmatian child's grave near the Don River holding a crude amber bear figurine. Its belly contains a scrap of Chinese silk woven with characters reading "Eternal Brightness." 2,000 years later, under museum lights, the resin still glows as if the steppe's long-lost sun never set. High in the roof of the world, where the air thins to a breathless whisper and glaciers carve the land like jagged teeth, the Himalayan salt licks hide their treasures in caves untouched by sunlight. These weren't just mining sites, they were sacred grounds where Tibetan monks guarded crystallized salt pillars as if they were fragments of the gods themselves. Picture this, Sherpa porters, their backs bent under woven baskets, scaling cliffs where a single misstep meant plunging into icy ravines, all for chunks of pink salt believed to hold the power to purify souls. The salt wasn't merely traded, it was consecrated, blessed by lamas who forbade its sale during holy months. turning entire trade caravans away with nothing but prayer flags fluttering in the wind. Yeti lore clung to these trails like frost. Local guides spun tales of the Migoi, towering ape-like guardians said to drag interlopers into crevasse-bound lairs. British colonial maps from the 1800s mark certain passes with skull and crossbones warnings not for avalanches but for snow demon territories. Scholars now suspect these stories were deliberate folklore, crafted to deter outsiders from discovering the salt's true sources. A 19th-century Nepalese ledger hidden in a monastery vault bluntly states, "Let the white men fear the shadows, the salt stays ours." The British Empire's salt tax was the death knell. By imposing brutal tariffs on Himalayan salt in 1859, they undercut its spiritual value with crushing economics. Overnight, a commodity once worth its weight in silver became a smuggler's burden. Tibetan monks resorted to hollowing out prayer wheels to hide salt, while Nepalese traders disguised it as chalk for monastery schools. The final insult, British-backed Indian salt flooded the markets, its bland uniformity erasing demand for the Himalayan variety's mineral-rich complexity. Today, satellite images reveal eerie grids of abandoned mining pits near Mustang, their geometric precision blurred by centuries of snowfall, but the land remembers. In remote Dolpo villages, elders still perform the salt dance, miming the loading of baskets to honor a trade route that once connected heaven and earth. And sometimes, when glaciers retreat, they expose the ultimate irony. Perfectly preserved British tax seals, still clamped around broken sacks of salt that no one came back to claim. Hidden beneath the jungles of India's Malabar coast and the mist-shrouded peaks of China's Yunnan province ran a trail so lucrative, empires waged shadow wars to control it, the Dragon's Backbone Pepper Trail. This wasn't just a trade route, it was a high-stakes game of espionage and deception, where Venetian merchants disguised as monks scribbled maps of pepper groves into their prayer books, and Ming Dynasty officials posted bounties for smugglers daring to bring foreign fire into the celestial kingdom. The prize, Malabar black pepper, a spice so precious in medieval China that it was measured in grains, not pounds. Unlike the mild Sichuan peppercorns native to the region, Malabar's variety arrived like a culinary revolution, fiery, complex, and rumored to cure everything from melancholy to demon possession. But the Ming emperors feared more than just flavor. They saw pepper as a threat to their closed-door policy, a luxury poison that could drain silver reserves and corrupt Confucian virtues. Edicts from the 1400s threatened beheadings for anyone caught importing it, forcing traders into the highlands of Yunnan, where they carved secret paths along ridges so narrow, porters had to walk single file like ants on a branch, hence the trail's name, Dragon's Backbone. Venetian spies, masters of Mediterranean trade, turned this clampdown into an opportunity. Disguised as Nestorian Christians, they infiltrated Ming ports, bribing eunuch officials with glass beads from Murano while smuggling pepper in hollowed-out Buddha statues. One surviving ledger from a Venetian merchant's estate lists payments to mountain men who speak with birds, likely indigenous guides who used whistled languages to evade patrols. The most brazen operation, a scheme to label pepper as medicinal sulfur in ship manifests, exploiting the Ming court's obsession with alchemy. Then came the Portuguese, who didn't bother with stealth. When Vasco da Gama rounded the Cape of Good Hope in 1498, he didn't just find the source of pepper, he weaponized it. Portuguese caravels laden with cannons and Malabar cargo parked off Macau and undercut overland smugglers by slashing prices overnight. A Ming chronicle from 1510 captures the chaos. Barbarian ships vomit pepper onto our shores like locusts eating silver, yet the trail's death wasn't sudden. For decades, traditionalists clung to the old routes, arguing Portuguese pepper lacked chi because it traveled by sea instead of absorbing mountain energy. Archaeologists have found Ming-era caches of pepper buried in Yunnan caves, still wrapped in Tibetan lambskin, proof that some believed the overland journey mattered as much as the spice itself. Today, satellite images reveal ghostly steps etched into cliffs where porters once balanced their loads, while in Goa, a single fresco in an abandoned church shows a Portuguese sailor laughing as he crushes a Chinese smuggling permit underfoot. The pepper one, but the dragon's backbone, it remains a silent monument to the wars fought over flavor. In the heart of China's Xinjiang region, where the earth cracks open like a parched throat, lies one of the Silk Road's most haunting graveyards, the ghost cities of Lop Nor. This wasn't just a trade route, it was a shifting theater of survival where entire towns rose and fell with the whims of the wandering lake, a body of water so unpredictable it could vanish overnight, leaving behind crusts of salt and the bones of abandoned settlements. Picture the scene, a bustling Tang dynasty outpost like Lulan, its wooden gates creaking under banners of silk one century, reduced to a skeleton of crumbling watchtowers the next, its wells choked with sand as the lake retreated like a receding tide. Archaeologists call it a hydrological ghost story, a place where water wrote the rules and humans were just temporary guests, but Lop Nor's death wasn't just environmental. In the 1960s, China chose this desolate landscape for its nuclear testing program, detonating atomic bombs with codenames like 596 and Test Number 6. The blasts didn't just vaporize the remains of ancient cities, they scrambled the Earth's memory. Shockwaves collapsed subterranean chambers where Silk Road merchants had stashed jade and manuscripts, while radiation rendered entire swaths of the region unreadable to modern satellite archaeology. A declassified CIA report from 1972 notes grimly, "The past here is now layered with isotopes, yet amid the destruction, one eerie pattern emerged. Pre-bomb American U-2 spy photos, once top secret, revealed grids of ancient irrigation canals and caravan tracks invisible to the naked eye, their geometric precision frozen in time before the explosions erased them forever." The real tragedy of Lop Nor isn't just what was lost, but what might have been. In the ruins of Murin, a monastery complex where murals of winged angels once hinted at Greco-Buddhist fusion, scientists found something unexpected. Bundles of hemp rope perfectly preserved, still tied in the knots used by 8th century traders to secure their camels. These weren't relics of grand commerce, but humble evidence of daily life, proof that even in this water-starved hellscape, people built, adapted, and clung to routine. Nearby, a child's wooden toy camel lay half-carved, its unfinished legs a silent testament to whoever fled mid-sculpture, perhaps as the lake's waters retreated for the last time. Today, Lop Nor's ghost cities live on in fragments. Google Earth reveals spectral outlines of walls buried under salt flats, while ground-penetrating radar picks up the echoes of buried bazaars. But the most poignant discovery came in 2014, when a team using drone photography spotted something the bombs missed: a single, intact segment of the Human Pass, a narrow defile where officials once inspected caravan permits. The stones still bear chisel marks in Kharosthi script, listing tariffs for jade, wool, and wine. It's a whisper from a world that knew nothing of atomic fire, a stubborn remnant of the Silk Road's paper trail, still legible in the age of satellites and fallout. Imagine a world where empires didn't just fight over gold or territory, but over the secret of turning rags into knowledge. The paper road to Samarkand wasn't just a trade route. It was history's first high-stakes technology heist, where the Abbasid Caliphate pulled off an operation so bold it rewrote the rules of power. The story begins in 751, at the wind-swept edges of the Tang Empire, where Chinese artisans had guarded the secret of paper-making for centuries. Their method was elegant: mulberry bark pounded into pulp, pressed thin as a dragonfly's wing, then dried into sheets that could hold more words than a roomful of bamboo scrolls. To let this slip beyond the borders was treason punishable by death. Then came the Battle of Tolas, when Abbasid forces clashed with Tang troops near modern-day Kyrgyzstan. They didn't just capture soldiers, they took prisoner 2 papermakers from the imperial workshops. Historians still debate whether these craftsmen defected willingly or were dragged in chains, but the result was explosive. The Abbasids smuggled them to Samarkand, a city already humming with Persian, Indian, and Greek knowledge. There, behind high walls along the Zarafshan River, the first paper mill outside China was born. The genius of the operation, they didn't just copy the process, they improved it. Chinese paper relied on scarce mulberry. The Samarkand mills substituted flax and hemp, turning discarded textiles into a revolution. But why hide this breakthrough? Paper was more valuable than silk because it carried ideas, and ideas could topple dynasties. The Abbasids knew if the Tang learned they'd lost their monopoly, they'd send assassins or armies. So the Caliph's spies spread deliberate misinformation, rumors that Samarkand's paper came from enchanted reeds or alchemical spells. They even faked production delays, pretending their supply was erratic when in reality, the mills ran day and night. A recently discovered letter in the Geniza archives reveals the subterfuge. Tell the Chinese merchant his order cannot be filled until the next moon, scribbled a Samarkand official, while production logs from the same week show 3,000 sheets shipped to Baghdad. The consequences rippled across continents. Within decades, paper reached Baghdad's House of Wisdom, turbocharging the Islamic Golden Age. Greek philosophy, Persian poetry, and Indian mathematics could now be copied cheaply and spread fast. Meanwhile in China, Tang officials grew suspicious as Samarkand paper appeared in border markets. Forensic analysis of surviving sheets tells the tail fibers from old fishing nets and ship ropes prove the mills were improvising with local materials, creating a product distinct enough to avoid immediate suspicion. The paper road's final irony, its own success erased it. By the 9th century, papermaking had spread to Cairo and Damascus, making Samarkand just another node in a global network. The very technology designed to conceal its origins became too ubiquitous to control. Today, all that remains are water-stained ledgers from the Zarafshan mills, their margins crammed with calculations not just of profits, but of how many sheets it would take to wrap the world in words. From the frozen bodies on the Pamir sky roads to the nuclear-scarred ghost cities of Lop Nor, the fates of these 25 lost routes read like a chronicle of humanity's restless ambition and its fragile footprint. Some vanished under dunes shifted by changing winds, like the Tarim Basin's ring of oases, their libraries of wooden contracts now fossilizing in the dry air. Others were strangled by empire building, their paths severed by borders as abruptly as the Khyber-Karakoram smuggler trails were bisected by modern barbed wire. A few met crueler fates, the Ferghana Valley's legendary horse trade dismantled by industrial mining, or the Sardaria's silver-laden barges starved by Soviet cotton canals. Even the most resilient, like the Himalayan salt licks with their Yeti-guarded caves, couldn't outlast the cold calculus of colonial tariffs. Yet their rediscovery is rewriting history's ledger. These weren't just trade arteries, they were the original social networks where Zoroastrian fire temples stood beside Buddhist stupas and Sogdian merchants bartered in dialects half the world has forgotten. The jade gateways and paper mills, the pepper smugglers and salt slaves, they prove globalization didn't begin with container ships, but with camels staggering under loads of yak tail whisks and fermented tea bricks. Every artifact pulled from the sand, whether a Sogdian love letter or a Venetian spy's pepper ledger, whispers that commerce was never just about goods. It was about reinvention, Buddhist art morphing into Islamic calligraphy, Greek coins stamped with Han Dynasty silk weights, empires trading not just spices but the very blueprints of power. So what's left for us scrolling through satellite images of these ghostly trails? Perhaps the thrill of knowing history's map still has blank spaces. Modern archaeology is piecing together fragments with drones and spectral imaging, yet whole chapters remain buried, like the Caspian's drowned ports waiting for a storm to expose them, or the Gobai's petrified caravan tracks still hiding under coal dust. These routes challenge us to see connections where borders now divide, to trace the echoes of a world where a Tibetan monk's snow lotus might wind up in a Baghdad physician's pouch, or a Baltic diver's amber could grace a Han emperor's tomb. Now it's your turn to wander these lost paths. Which route grips your imagination? The lawless northern bypass where tax-dodging merchants prayed to sand-buried Buddhas? Or maybe the Hyrcanian jungle's whispering smugglers, their bird call codes lost to time? Drop your pick in the comments, and who knows, the next great Silk Road rediscovery might begin with your curiosity. After all, history's greatest journeys always start with a single question left in the